Hello and welcome back. And in this video, we are going to be exploring the observation framework in SwiftUI. So, observation framework was introduced in iOS 16, and it offers a robust, type-safe, and performant implementation of observer design pattern in Swift. This pattern enables an observable object to manage a list of observers and inform them about the state changes. This new framework has an advantage over the combined base approach of setting the observable object and publishers, as it avoids basically the direct coupling of object and allows an entire object to distribute updates across potential multiple observers. Let's explore this with an example. We will create a simple accounting view to keep track of expenses. Our data model will be like this. So we're going to create a final class called expense. We're going to make sure that this conforms to identifiable protocol. You're going to have three properties, one as an ID to conform, basically to satisfy the conformance of identifiable, and also to be able to recognize individual items. Then we're going to have properties for name, essentially to know what kind of expense it is, or the name of the expense, along with the amount, how much did we spend. Okay, so let's go ahead and add those three properties. Right, we are going to create an initializer which will take name and amount and populate corresponding properties. Okay, now we can't directly use this model with SwiftUI view because these properties are not bindable. Therefore, we are going to basically import observation framework and add the observable macro to the data model. All right, with these two changes, our model is ready to be used with SwiftUI view. So let's go ahead and create the SwiftUI view, and we'll begin by defining basically two state properties to hold the expenses. Let's go ahead and call this view and cite the observation example. And I'm going to resume the preview section till that time is loading. Okay, so what we're going to do is basically under the simple accounting view, we're going to create two properties. One to hold the expenses, all the expenses. Basically, it's going to be an array, and it's going to be a state property. So we're going to be inserting basically new expenses in here. And we're also going to have a state variable to track the new expense. So user will be able to add new expense basically using that observable or that state property. Okay, so let's go ahead and add state private var expenses. And new expense. All right, so now we're seeing this error. Basically, the expense wants us to provide the value for name and amount, and we don't want to do that right now because we want to actually bind these properties and then later on populate them. So what we can do to solve this error is basically we can set some default values in the initializer for these properties. And with that change, our errors go away. Now, view, this view's body property will contain a navigation view and a list view. Or rather, navigation stack and a list view. Okay. Now we'll render all the expenses from the state property expenses using a for each view. Okay, so let's go ahead and set our for each view, and we're gonna go through all the expenses, and we're gonna basically get a individual expense. And then we're going to create an H stack. This H stack is going to display basically the expense dot name. Let's set the font type as body and foreground color or foreground style as primary. Right underneath, we're going to basically display the expense amount, and we're going to show this as a formatted currency property or currency value. So we're going to create a text view. You're going to take our expense, basically fetch the amount property, and then format it in the form of currency, and I'm going to provide the currency type as USD, so it's automatically going to format it for the US dollar, and all the standards that you need to follow to show that. Foreground style is going to be primary for this one. Again, reason is because the amount is more important, like how much did you spend, so that's why we are making that as primary. Now let's add basically text field views. Okay, and what we're going to do with these text field views, this will allow user to add new expenses into the view. Okay, and text field view, we're going to add it right underneath the for each. Okay, so we're going to create a VStack under the for each, and this VStack is going to have an H stack, and this H stack is going to basically have text, two text fields. Expense name bound to text, new expense dot name, expense amount bound to, once again. So this time actually we're going to use amount value, so new expense dot amount, and because this is an amount value, we want to format this, and we're going to format this as a number. Okay, then our text field will take this value happily. Okay, so now you can see we have the expense name and the amount shown up here. All right, now right underneath this H tag, we're going to add a button, and this button is going to be add new expense. Basically this was going to say, and it's going to take the expenses, append newly added expense, essentially basically the new expense that's been added. Now what we want to do is, after we added the expense, we want to empty the object, so we're going to reinitialize the expense or new expense with an expense, just like that. Okay, so this is going to basically empty out the fields, these text fields. Now what's happening here, notice that we are able to directly bind these new expense and new expense amount. Also notice that new expense is defined as state property, and if you remember, like, you know, back in the days when you were using an observable an observable object. Basically, when you're defining an observable object, you're publishing properties, then you'd have to use state object in order to track changes of or make those fields bindable. Now you don't have to do any of that. And one more thing is you don't need to define any publish property or decorate any of the property as published, because the entire object itself has subscribed itself to basically broadcast whenever some changes happen in those properties. So we can directly bind those properties with the state variable to monitor basically an expense change, to monitor the changes and update our view to reflect those changes. Okay, let's go ahead and add a navigation title. So right outside the list, we're gonna add a title, and we're gonna call this DT expenses, just like that. Okay, now we have this expense. Let's go ahead and try to add, so coffee 1.25, add expense, and as you can see, our coffee expense shows up right here. Okay, so basically now our expenses are showing up, and as you can see, as we add more and more, basically they're all going to be rendered here. So let's say sandwich, and notice that our data is basically formatted. Now there is an issue that you notice here. Basically the issue is that even though we actually added 6.25, what we got was basically $6. The reason for that is because the amount is defined as integer. You can change it to double as well. Let's change it to double, and then we're gonna basically let it refresh, and let's go ahead and set the values. So coffee, and as you notice that we can actually add 0 expenses. So let's go ahead and fix that issue as well. So what we want to do is whenever user is clicking on the add new expense, first of all, we can do two things. We can either disable the button, so until user has entered something in the expense name, we don't want to basically enable the button. So let's go ahead and take a look at that approach. So disabled new expense dot name dot is empty. So if it is empty, we're actually gonna leave it disabled. As soon as we type, let's say coffee 1.25 or 24, add it, then we can add it, add the expense. Or rather, you can actually add an if statement here saying if the name is empty, and the expense amount is empty, just don't add anything, because we want to leave it we don't want to add any $0 expenses. Okay, now let's say food. I'm just gonna say food 7.25 or 35. All right, so we got the food added. Now you can see that we have all the values added. And because of the observation framework, our code is very clean, as if we are just dealing with local state here, but that data is being saved or being observed from a separate class or separate model that's been publishing all these changes. Now let's go ahead and finish this app by adding a total field. So we want to basically show how much total expenses we have done, and we're going to do that by adding a new a total view inside the safe area inset. Okay, using safe area inset modifier, so it's going to show up right here. Okay, so we'll use safe area inset modifier to display the running total for the expenses. So let's go ahead and add a safe area inset. So I'm gonna collapse this guy and collapse this guy right here, and right underneath the navigation title, we're gonna have safe area inset. Okay, and we're gonna define the edge. The edge is gonna be the bottom, and then we're gonna define the content. Content is simply gonna be a text with total Okay, and now let's go ahead and set the foreground style for this guy as secondary. We're gonna append another text view by simply adding a plus and expenses dot reduce, and we're gonna set the initial value for reduce as 0 because, like, expense, when we are adding, like, at this point it starts with $0, and let's say 0.0, and the next partial is going to be basically the partial result, basically the result that we have so far. Yes. All right, and the expense object, that the expense, newly added expense, and what we're going to do is we're going to simply say result, the current total, plus exp dot amount. Basically getting those two values and adding them together will give us, like, the new value. Now basically this requires, like, CG float protocol and stuff like that, because, like, the view is not formatted yet. So what we're going to do is right outside the expense dot reduce, we're going to actually call the formatted, and we're going to format this as currency with the currency code USD. Okay, and we're going to set the font for this guy as title, and the foreground style for this as primary. All right, so now with that, we have built a mini version of an expense tracking app using SwiftUI and observation framework. Now note that we did not use anything combined related. For example, observable object, state object, published. Everything is basically managed through the observation framework. So let's go ahead and try this out for one last time. So I'm gonna set coffee. All right, our running total is $1.25. Let's say rent. I'm gonna add the rent. Let's say, like, expensive rent. So then we have, like, 7,000, and let's say food is like what, $12.76. And there we go. Like, our running total is working fine. All of our expenses are looking fine. Now all you gotta do is basically save this somewhere using Swift data, and you are good to go. All right, so with that, we have reached the end of this video where we actually built a mini expenses app using observation framework and SwiftUI, just to see, like, how easy it is with the observation framework to basically build out something that can actually publish all the properties and broadcast, like, changes, and you can listen and update the UI states. Okay, with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in another video.